Mike Klubnika is a name that many of you will probably recognize. Known for creating many modern gems of the indie horror genre, including titles such as Concrete Tremor, Carbon Steel, and undoubtedly most famous of all, Buckshot Roulette, his works are among some of the most beloved and cherished horror titles in contemporary gaming. Anyone who's played a Klubnika game before will be able to speak to the potent and unique sense of atmosphere that persists in virtually every one of his titles. Few other creators manage to pack such a consistent, pervasive atmosphere into each project they create, and combined with their unique visual and narrative quality, his catalog has a macabre allure mastered by very few others, which is, of course, the reason that his works have become a somewhat recurring topic here on this channel. Each of Klubnika's games is framed sort of like a short story. You can play through most of them in under 15 minutes, and almost every one explores a drastically different subject matter. But appearances can be deceiving, for in spite of the fact that each game may seem to be a completely disparate creation from the last, we know from a Q&A conducted back in 2024 that these worlds aren't nearly as separate as they may at first seem. Although, like many, I initially found Klubnika's work through Buckshot Roulette, the interconnected universe of his games is something that's fascinated me ever since. There's something about these titles existing as one, and the almost Lovecraft-esque mythos therein that I think is hard not to find really striking. So when Mike's newest game, s.p.l.i.t, was announced back in July of this year, I got the feeling that we were in for something pretty special. From the very first trailer, we got the sense that this game was going to be quite the significant one. Everything from the atmosphere to the title's description on Steam hinted at a development in the overarching lore that we've been waiting for a long time. One that, in some ways, dramatically increases our understanding of Klubnika's overarching world, and in others, completely destroys it. But how could this be? How much context could this short little game really offer to the rest of Klubnika's works? And considering all of the creator's other projects that released recently as well, stuff like the end of the infamous Buckshot Roulette ARG and the release of yet another new game, Fused 240, why was it this title in particular that finally prompted me to revisit this incredible and lore-rich world? This is a story of life, death, and cruel machines. This is the lore and legacy of s.p.l.i.t. Now, before we get started, there are a couple of things that I think I should make clear from the outset. First, like all of Mike Klubnika's works, s.p.l.i.t is a psychological horror game, and deals with themes that players are meant to find somewhat disturbing. One of these themes, in the case of this game, is that of self-harm, so if you're not in a place where you feel comfortable discussing a topic like this in the context of the game, then it's probably best to sit this one out. In addition, although I already disclosed it at the beginning, this video is going to feature some pretty heavy spoilers for a number of Mike's games, including s.p.l.i.t. So if you haven't played the game before watching this video, I would highly recommend it. I would hate to be the one to ruin the brilliant atmosphere and storytelling for you before you have a chance to experience it yourself. There will be a link provided in the description so that you can purchase the game on Steam if you haven't already. But for everyone else, it's time to meet our characters. Now, as most of you probably know, s.p.l.i.t is a game centered around hacking. Even from the very first on-screen interaction that occurs, this will become pretty apparent. But in order to fully understand the story of the game, we have to familiarize ourselves with the three characters planning this attack. Characters by the names of Victor, Sarah, and Axel. Not much is known about this trio, especially not in the game's initial act. Though we play as Axel throughout the entirety of the experience, the game throws us into the fold head first, with virtually no explanation of precisely what it is our small team is endeavoring to do, nor why they're doing it. But over time, we do ascertain a little bit about the background these characters share and what brought them together in the first place. To put it bluntly, all three of our characters are probably most concisely defined as disgruntled employees, those who, for one reason or another, have turned against the organization for which they work. Victor and Sarah, in particular, we'll learn, have some highly specific ties to their target, but we'll discuss that in more depth a bit later on. As Axel, we're the only one of the three that seems to be physically disconnected from the entity we're hoping to breach, but even then, it's hinted that we have ties as well, since we do have access to some pretty high-level equipment, namely the kit, a briefcase computer of some kind, which proves essential to the trio's plans and serves as the earliest subject of conversation between Axel and Sarah, a conversation where we're also pretty quickly introduced to the stakes of this particular operation.
Let me know as soon as you get the case. Have it now. You there? Yeah. Is this the same one as in the photographs? Nope. Old portable of what they used to have in the engine. I just need you to send me the transfer ID after you run the hardware like we talked about. Like we talked about? I thought we'll be working on the latest model. The back end is mostly the same. Fuck that. I don't have experience with this kit. I'm out. You know it's too late for that. Since when are you scared of death? Death is the least of my worries. Being dragged into the facility is what scares me.
Already, we're made well aware that the hackers of s.p.l.i.t aren't your average run-of-the-mill hooligans, trying to breach a system sheerly for financial gain or merely for the heck of it. Instead, there's a very real danger associated with whatever's going on here, one that places risk upon their very lives, which is something that's reinforced only a couple of correspondences later when Sarah asks if everyone has what she calls a way out. Axel confirms, and as the camera zooms out, well, it quickly becomes clear that the end result of the team's work is simply too big to walk away from one way or another. Just like that, though, it's time to get to work. While not super robust, the gameplay in s.p.l.i.t is fairly unique. Pretty much the entirety of the game is played from a virtualized desktop computer, where we type out real command line interface style prompts in order to navigate and interact with various programs, while completing a number of objectives on our way to gaining access to our target. The first few tasks we're given are pretty easy. Connect to the kit we've stolen, whitelist the machine number, and copy the unprotected data to the PC, all while Sarah and Victor continue to coach us from the other monitor, and outline how our actions unfold on their end. After assimilating the kit's encrypted files, Victor gains access to a security hangar within the target facility, stocked with a large number of security personnel and vehicles, which leads to an interesting conversation between himself and Sarah, where they discuss their positions in this mysterious organization in a bit more depth.
Imagine having a hangar like that and you don't air gap the network. Entire place is held up by duct tape. You'd be surprised. I've worked here longer than you. Am I supposed to be jealous now? What do you mean? You know what I mean. Well, at least I didn't write interrogation presets. They work on engine code, which is your branch. Every single person here, including you, is going to hell. I think we're already in hell.
It's a very odd little interaction that prompts us to wonder once again about what it is we're actually breaching into here. Knowing that this company has a division for interrogation presets definitely doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, and when in the next phase of the breach we're given a list of inmates, the nature of our target is starting to become a lot more clear. We're not just breaking into an individual server or corporation. This is a prison, and before we even know it, we're closing in on the final step of the plan. Using the aforementioned inmate list, a server room schematic, and a reference number provided by Sarah, we're able to generate an authorization key that we can use to gain access to the inner workings of our stolen kit. Whatever our goal is, we're about to reach it, and everything will be revealed. But as time would tell, this would be the beginning of the end. Long story short, our breach fails. Though we were able to brute force our way in and seemingly gain root access to this mysterious system, at least for a short time, there's an extra wrinkle which inhibits the team from realizing their plan at the very last moment. See, as it turns out, the target of this attack is a critical piece of infrastructure, only ever referred to as the centrifuge. And though we lack a concrete understanding of precisely what this centrifuge is or what it does, we do know that it must be important. It's believed that bringing the centrifuge offline would have disastrous implications for the target organization, but of course, something so critical isn't likely to be without a backup. And this is precisely what would end up foiling our otherwise well-laid plan. Sadly, it looks like Axel's way out is going to come in handy after all, except it's now that it comes to our attention that we've made a terrible mistake.
All they'll find is an old field kit, wiped discs, and some former tech hanging from the ceiling. You have no trace. They'll think I'm some preset junkie. I was expecting this. What do you mean, hanging from the ceiling? It's my way out. What do you want me to say? No, it's not. Your brain won't be destroyed. They will plug you into the machine.
Well, it's time to face the music. It's time to finally learn who or what is causing all of this. What I love about this moment in S.p.l.i.t is how perfectly it encapsulates everything that's so incredible about Klubnika's brand of storytelling. If this is your first introduction to his work, then this moment where we discover that our target somehow has the capacity to revive and evidently imprison the dead comes across as a great twist which ties together a lot of the story beats we've seen up to this point. All of a sudden, it becomes clear why the stakes of our mission are so high. It makes sense why each member of the team needs a way out and why Axel's method wouldn't be sufficient. But the beauty of the build-up so far is that while this is the extent of the journey perceived by the uninitiated, many of us, those already familiar with Klubnika's work, will see things a little differently. Because although I've made my best effort to bury the lead up to this point, the truth is that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt exactly who this target of ours is. It's time to talk about the Tartarus Engine. If Klubnika's works are gaming's version of the Lovecraft mythos, then the Tartarus Engine is almost certainly his Cthulhu. It's an adversarial force, one whose influence can be felt at various points throughout the series, even if it doesn't appear within a given title directly, and in fact, up until recently, we didn't even have so much as a name to attribute to this thing. Only a small series of seemingly interconnected phenomena, which indicated some kind of larger force at play. The term Tartarus Engine itself would take a lot longer to materialize, first appearing in the title of the same name, shipped exclusively as part of Unsorted Horror, a collection of some of Klubnika's most cherished titles, available for free on itch.io and Steam. And although initially appearing as a simple bonus game, Tartarus Engine would quickly garner a lot of attention, becoming one of the most influential and important titles in the creator's entire catalog. The premise of Tartarus Engine is simple. In the year 2009, a massive computer system was erected with enough computational power to fully simulate virtually any experience to a point of being nearly indistinguishable from base reality. It's essentially a matrix machine, and of course, while this technology certainly has the potential to be used for a lot of good, this is a horror game, so that's not the way that things proceed. Instead of simply being used for research or entertainment, the tech quickly finds use in the prison industrial complex, where it would be employed to simulate the first reality of eternal torment, hence the name Tartarus Engine. But as seen in the game, there's one very specific flaw in the engine's design. As we already know, the technology at play here isn't overtly sinister. The breadth of the experiences that the Tartarus Engine is capable of simulating is not relegated exclusively to the negative. And so, in the course of the game, we follow a team of maintenance workers with an interesting idea to leverage the tech for themselves. Their goal is to create their own personalized reality preset, a utopia optimized to suit their every whim, and by leveraging the fact that inside of the simulated realities of the engine, time apparently moves 1.2 times slower than in base reality, they theorize that by opening multiple layers of the simulation, one inside the next, they could theoretically dilate time to the extent that their personal perfect utopia persists to what is effectively infinity. To do this, our player character, a technician named Harper, is tasked with swapping one of the system's partitions with a drive tailored to the group's illicit purposes. This is where the actual gameplay of Tartarus Engine occurs, but the whole task only takes a couple of minutes, and before long we find ourselves back with the rest of the group, preparing to strap in to the foreboding machine. At first, everything seems to be going to plan, but of course, something goes horribly wrong. One simple misstep, and our techs find themselves trapped not in utopia, but in a cascade of infinitely longer and deeper sub-realities, their minds fully imprisoned within the most complex and sanity-breaking incarceration system ever devised. This is the true horror of the Tartarus Engine, and knowing what kind of evil we're dealing with here, some of the content seen in S.p.l.i.t may start to make a bit more sense. This is why we're sent both a server list by Victor and an inmate registry by Sarah. This is the type of organization that would have a division for interrogation presets, and it's why the team has agreed that having a way out is a necessary contingency. When transgressing against the engine, failure and eternal torment are synonymous. So, faced with the reality that the centrifuge is still operational and that the infernal machine can apparently resurrect his consciousness even after death, Axel is left with only one thing to do. His brain has to be rendered unrecoverable, and with engine personnel quickly mobilizing on his location, that's exactly what he endeavors to do. From here, we approach the end of the game, but the final portion of S.p.l.i.t is somewhat unlike anything we've played so far. Like many of Klubnika's games, S.p.l.i.t features multiple endings, and in this final portion, we essentially have to complete a series of quick-time events in order to receive the favorable one, using a typing-based mechanic that was briefly introduced earlier. As you may expect, Axel dies in both endings, but the key difference is whether or not his consciousness is rendered recoverable after the fact, leading to a couple of slightly different epilogues. In the event that we fail, Axel succumbs to panic and utilizes his original way out contrary to Sarah's warning, which pretty much plays out exactly as you would expect. When personnel arrive on the scene, they quickly realize that Axel's brain is left intact, and so it's collected with plans to plug it into the engine, just as Axel himself had feared. There's not much of note here. It's a pretty standard bad ending that doesn't expand much upon the lore of this world outside of what we've already discovered. But the other version of this scene, the quote-unquote good ending, if you can even call it that, is a little bit different in a couple of very important ways. In the event that Axel's brain is destroyed, the scene from the agent's body cameras plays out pretty much the same way, except for that they quickly realize that, given the state of the body, there's virtually no chance that his consciousness can be resurrected. This isn't really expanded upon on the official record, but once back inside the truck, it becomes clear that the two engine employees are very shaken up about this. For just like Axel and company, these two men are very scared of their employer.
We weren't fast enough. Now they think we're in on it. They're gonna break us. They're gonna put us in the machine forever. We're the only trace. But you weren't in on it. I know. This has gone down in 20 years. It was him, but he wasn't alone. Wouldn't we go after the technicians first? The others? There is no trace. What part of this do you not understand? He's short-circuited at the damn hard drive. This is some random preset junkie we can find. But they almost got the centrifuge. Our convoy is the only loose end. You know the truck is a tractor, right? Doesn't matter. They'll get us anyway. So we do it before they get us. With what? Pellet guns, blood trauma, a fucking screwdriver? We can't even take our helmets off. Gyros? No. What? Scared? This Corsifer's right. Who's gonna do me after I run you over this fucking prick?
So, with everything said and done, I think it's pretty obvious that S.p.l.i.t is a very dark game, perhaps one of the darkest its creator has ever made. But now that we've thoroughly reviewed the game's events and talked about some of the implications therein, you might be left wondering just one thing. Why does any of this actually matter? Yeah, you wouldn't be remiss for thinking that not a lot actually happens here, and in a way, you wouldn't be exactly wrong. If we look at the events of S.p.l.i.t in a purely literal way, nothing really gets resolved, and there's no change to the greater world of the game that would indicate the larger narrative at play is being altered or strung along in any significant way. But Klubnika isn't exactly unfamiliar with this type of storytelling. Just like many of his other games, S.p.l.i.t is a title where the devil is very much in the details. And even though the events of our characters haven't been particularly pressing, it's the things we've picked up along the way that make all the difference here. And especially within the epilogue, do we find a trove of new lore to make sense of. First and foremost, S.p.l.i.t marks what is by far the latest chronological entry in the Klubnika timeline. We know this from the timestamp provided by the camera used by the two engine personnel who responded at the end of the game, which places these events in the year 2082, 3 whole decades later than the previous record holder, System Upkeep. This is extremely significant, not only because it continues to widen the relevant time frame of this series further and further into the future, but also because it's the first time we've seen so much as a trace of the Tartarus Engine in a whopping 60 years of in-universe history. The last time this type of technology made an appearance was in the infamous suspense thriller title Infineural, a game which takes place in the year 2022 and sees us playing as yet another unnamed character, setting out to participate in a study being held by the titular organization. At the beginning of the title, when arriving at the Infineural facility, we are greeted with a little more than an empty room and a bit of light reading, where we quickly find that to conduct this study, the company utilizes a piece of technology known as a warp drive, which apparently allows them to transport participants to a testing facility where time is dilated to a dramatic extent. Sound familiar? Contrary to what you may be thinking though, Infineural actually doesn't show us a lot of signs of overtly malicious intent. Because every minute in base reality equates to 10 years inside the study, we are offered an anesthetic beverage in order to nullify the psychological effects of what's about to take place. And if we decide to take it, then things actually don't end up too bad for us. We get a big payday, and life goes on as normal. Instead, it's our own curiosity that leads us to our undoing in this game, as if we neglect the drink, we'll be subjected to 50 years worth of unending survey questions in a span of merely 5 real-world minutes. Obviously, in light of what we know about the Tartarus Engine in the modern day, it's widely accepted that Infineural was likely utilizing a branch of the same system to conduct their study. In fact, it may have even been as a direct result of Harper and his gang's unfortunate pilgrimage into the furthest reaches of dilated time just 13 years earlier that this study came to be at all, a relatively mundane or even positive outcome from such an unfortunate event. Given that this was the last time we saw the engine prior to S.p.l.i.t, you'd be excused for thinking that perhaps the darkest days of the Tartarus Engine were over. As S.p.l.i.t has shown us though, this is definitely not the case, and in fact, those behind the project seem to have adopted an even darker and more draconian policy than ever before, which also ties nicely into our next big discovery. Owing to the newfound use of private military personnel, a facet of this industrial complex that seems somewhat new since it was never alluded to back in the original game, we seem to have finally acquired a name, a corporate entity to associate with the Tartarus Engine project itself. KETAS Electronics, a company that, at least to my knowledge, has never appeared at any other point in previous Klubnika games. It's unclear if KETAS has had dominion over the engine project from the very beginning, but even if not, it's pretty clear that they're heavily involved by 2082. Even their symbol, which seems to appear in the backdrop of these still frames seen throughout the personnel bodycam footage, appears like an abstract version of the ominous barrel affixed to the device's prison chambers. Unfortunately, we know very little else about KETAS Electronics at this time, but it's definitely something we, as fans, ought to keep an eye on, henceforth joining the likes of Volta and Ecker as yet another dark corporate entity lurking in the background of this interconnected world. But at last we reach what I believe to be the most significant revelation of this video, the most major lore implication that S.p.l.i.t brings to the table, and the thing which caused me to want to talk about all of this in the first place. Because what we've learned in S.p.l.i.t also helps to finally illuminate the mysteries of another game, and it's one that we've been trying to place within the Klubnika extended universe for a very long time. 2022's Core is one of Mike Klubnika's earliest games, and within it, we adopt the role of yet another unnamed protagonist as we traverse the long-abandoned halls of an impossibly large mega-structural complex. The adventure that unfolds isn't particularly long, but it is a decently engaging one, filled with suspense and dread at every turn. Right from the beginning, the premise of the game is clear. We're looking for an object known as the Core, presumably sitting somewhere at the heart of the facility we found ourselves in, and on the way there, we're tasked with avoiding massive spider-like beings known as Sentinels, seen restlessly patrolling the many darkened corridors of their domain. Yeah, I have to admit, even in spite of their rudimentary models, these things give me the creeps. And moreover, it's not hard to see how even in this early phase of the artist's career, Core still demonstrates a lot of the familiar themes we've come to recognize in Mike's work. But for a long time, there's been a theory that beneath the decay and rust of Core's world, there's an odd sense of familiarity. For many years, there's been a prominent theory in the community that's attempted to make meaning of precisely when and where Core takes place. It's been posited that the layouts of hallways, elevators, and perhaps most damningly, the vast, narrow expanse we can see at certain areas of the game all bear striking similarity to the facility we would later see in Tartarus Engine. And in some places, it's hard to deny, the resemblance is practically uncanny. Could Core be the inevitable fate of the place which once housed the cruelest, most terrifying prison in history? It's a tantalizing theory, but historically there's been one major flaw with this idea. If the Core and Tartarus Engine facilities are one and the same, then what is the Core itself? Well, if a component like that doesn't sound similar to the centrifuge, then I don't know what does. And while none of this completely confirms Core's placement in the far-flung future of the Klubnika game's timeline, I think it's definitely a damn good reinforcement of that idea, which ultimately actually describes a lot of what we've gotten out of S.p.l.i.t as a whole. Klubnika's titles have always had somewhat confusing continuity. They've always had an underlying sense of connectedness, whether it be technology, creatures, or just a general feeling shared across works. But we've always been missing that through line, that singular title that helped to tie everything together. And while I wouldn't go so far as to say that S.p.l.i.t completely provides the closure we're looking for, I think it is a strong step in the right direction. The reason that this game is important is not so much because of the events on screen, but because of the supplemental stuff. The simple wink and nod that tells us that the Tartarus Engine hasn't been forgotten, that older games, even, dare I say, some of the oldest in Mike's catalog, are still important. And yet, to finish it off, there's obviously a slathering of new mysteries here too. Who is KETAS? How does resurrecting the consciousness of a deceased brain contribute to the Tartarus Engine's function as a prison, if it's even still a prison at all? And of course, what, if any bearing, does any of this have on other games, in or out of the established Klubnika chronology? At this point, the unfortunate truth is that we simply don't know, but that's a good part of the reason I thought it worthwhile to make this video. Perhaps together, there's even more to uncover. And maybe death isn't the end of Axel's story after all. I guess with all of that being said, it's probably time to update the old Klubnika timeline, isn't it? Well, that's a story for another day. And until then, this is Averberon. I'll see you again soon, and have a good one.